Okay, we talk about amylose and amylopectin, and amylose and amylopectin are carbohydrates. They are polysaccharides, but specifically they are starch. Yes, these are two forms of starch that I'm going to talk about right now. It's usually the time when some people start to panic because they see, oh my gosh, it's such a complicated formula, but in reality it's not that complicated, and that's basically what I'm gonna show you over here. So first of all, starch is one of our main energy sources that we humans use, and it is a polymer of alpha-D-glucose. A polymer is a long chain. It's a long chain of alpha-D-glucose. So apparently there are different forms of glucose as well. Yes, there are two forms of glucose, and that's one of them. It's alpha-D-glucose. And basically, starch is used to store glucose by plants, and it is and there are two forms present. Yeah, alpha and beta glucose, but starch only uses the alpha glucose. And there are two forms of starch, amylose and amylopectin. And now, simply without going into too much details in the formula, if you just look at these two chemical structural formulas over here, you already see a very fundamental difference, namely that in amylose, in this form of starch, you have a long chain of glucose, of course. So that's a glucose, and this is a glucose over here, and this is a glucose, so they're linked together. We have the same down here as well. But there are also additional branches up here, okay? So amylopectin is more branched than amylose. And if you do not like this drawing over here so much because the formula confuses you, I'm just gonna make it really simple over here. If one of these circles is a glucose molecule, and yeah, that's a glucose, this one over here. So if you have a chain, a long chain of glucose molecules, then it's amylose. That's this one over here. And amylopectin would look like this. You have a glucose. It goes on, I don't know how many times, a few million times, a few billion times. And occasionally you have over here also branches like this. Bad drawing. Okay, but you get the idea, okay? And then maybe you have another branch over here. Okay, so that is basically... this is amylopectin, and these branches that you see which extend upwards, this one over here and this one over here, well, these are the links over here that we see over here. Okay, so that is, so amylopectin is more branched than amylose. So, and now if you would like to know a little bit more about how we actually call these bonds over here, or how we number them, let's have a look at this glucose molecule over here in the middle over here. Each corner is a carbon. So that's a carbon, 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 carbon. So how many carbons are there? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, and these carbons are numbered, and we always make sure that the oxygen is at the top right corner, and then we start numbering it clockwise. So this one is carbon 1, carbon 2, carbon 3, carbon 4, carbon 5, and carbon 6. For whatever reason, the organic chemists, they kind of use this system. Okay, so that is basically international standard. So that's carbon 1, and so I write number 1 over here. Just so that we remember that it is carbon 1. And this one over here of the next glucose molecule, this one over here is carbon number 4. So because we have also 1, 2, 3, and over here we have carbon number 4. And you see that basically carbon 1 and carbon 4, they are linked together over here. So these are the so-called the 1,4 linkages, 1,4 bonds. You find 1,4 bonds in amylose, and over here we have another 1,4 bond, a 1,4 bond, and so on. It goes on. And over here, what we have over here, we also have these 1,4 bonds down here, but we have additional bonds, additional links branching away over here. So what bonds are these? Over here, this is carbon number 1. Okay, remember we count clockwise, and this one over here that you see is carbon number 6. So this carbon over here at the corner, not specifically mentioned, but so I'm going to draw this in. This carbon over here is carbon number 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And this carbon number 6 is bonded to carbon number 1 of the other glucose molecule. So we have the 1,4 bonds down here, and the 1,6 bonds up here. So amylopectin contains 1 to 4 bonds and 1 to 6 bonds. Okay, so that is basically the how shall I say, the basic idea. So again, starch contains there are two forms of starch, amylose and amylopectin, and they are different in the branching that they have. So amylose is less branched than amylopectin, and this was our first polysaccharide. So now we move on to the next one, and here it becomes a little bit more interesting. We now talk about another substance, which is also a long chain of glucose molecules. I've drawn the form a little bit differently over here. So you see again our long chain of glucose molecules, but this is cellulose. And cellulose is an important component of plant cell walls. And essentially you see now that it alternates. You have the OH, CH2OH pointing down here, up here, down here. Because here we're using a different form of glucose. Here we're using beta-D-glucose, and it is a structural component of plant cell walls, as already mentioned. And nope, that is not the right foil. And what is the difference now? How is alpha and beta-glucose different? In this one over here is what we see over here, where it is when the OH is pointing downwards, then this is beta glucose. Okay, and when the OH over here is pointing upwards, then this one is alpha glucose. So this one over here is used. No, now I messed it up. Okay, look at this. Does this make sense? If I say over here beta glucose, look at this. Is this correct? Look at this. It's pointing upwards over here, right? Yeah, so this OH must be pointing upwards, and if it's beta glucose, how can this be? So what should I do? You take it away, and this one of course over here is beta glucose down here, and this one is alpha glucose. Okay, because in starch you used alpha glucose, and you remember the link was downwards, was pointing downwards. So this one over here is used for starch. And this one over here is used for cellulose. Okay, in order to make sure that this works out, you can actually see that over here, in one case it's pointing downwards and upwards because the whole molecule is turned upside down. And this actually causes cellulose to be in long fibers. So cellulose fibers they go kind of zigzag, and they're kind of long. While starch, because the glucose molecule is not flipped around, starch is actually spiraling. So I say versus starch. Because starch, the glucose molecules, they actually when they make a spiral form, and this is not a fiber. So that is basically the difference over here. So know that in cellulose you use beta D-glucose, and in starch you use alpha D-glucose. So that was already our second polysaccharide, and the third one, the last one, we can keep relatively short. The last one is known as glycogen. And if you look at the formula for glycogen, I don't know, this looks very familiar over here, because it actually looks like amylopectin. You have the 1,4 links down here and the 1,6 links up here, but the difference is that it's simply more branched. Glycogen is also known as animal starch. Animal starch, and this is the way that animals, like human beings, like mammals, they use glucose in the liver and the muscles. Okay, and the advantage of glycogen is that it's insoluble in water and therefore storable, and it does not influence the osmotic balance of cells. Okay, so to give you so that was basically what I wanted to say concerning glycogen. So glycogen is very similar to starch. But a little bit an overview. The whole thing with polysaccharides and carbohydrates and so on. Is there a kind of an overview? I want to give you an overview. Okay. So the big category is carbohydrates. Okay, I'm going to draw it like this over here because it's some separate information. Carbohydrates can be subdivided into monosaccharides. These are the simple sugars. Disaccharides. and polysaccharides. And these polysaccharides are subdivided again into 3 parts, namely starch, which I again subdivided into 2 parts. I don't know how I'm going to draw this. I'll draw it over here. Amylose and amylopectin. Okay, no, not like this. Amylopectin, starch, cellulose, and glycogen. That is basically the overview outline, okay? Yeah, which kind of also shows all the subdivisions. Otherwise, you might have a problem kind of maintaining an overview. But that should kind of give you the overview a little bit, okay? So that was basically it. And this, yeah, I think that's pretty much all I want to say concerning polysaccharides.